Today, we're going to dive into a teaching that's about 2,500 years old, but you'll see, it feels like it was written for right now. It uses this one single powerful metaphor to completely reframe how we deal with the crazy pressures of modern life. It's basically a riddle about crossing a flood, and trust me, the solution is as mind-bending today as it was back then. Life is a flood. It's so simple, but it just hits you, right? You know that feeling of being totally submerged with currents pulling you in a million different directions at once? Well, ancient Buddhist texts, especially one called the Samyutta Nikaya, they start with this exact idea. They say that just to exist is to be smack in the middle of a raging flood. So, what are these currents that are always trying to pull us under? The texts don't just leave it as some vague, poetic idea. Oh no, they get really specific. They actually identify 4 distinct currents, or floods, that are the reason we're all struggling to keep our heads above water. Let's take a look at what they are. Okay, so here are the big 4. First, you've got the flood of sensuality. That's our endless chase for pleasant things, sights, sounds, tastes, you name it. Then there's the flood of existence. This one's a little deeper. It's that powerful, clinging desire just to be, to keep going, to become something more, something permanent. Third is the flood of views. This is when we get totally stuck in our own opinions, defending our ideas like they're the absolute final truth. And last, but definitely not least, is the flood of ignorance. This is the big one, not understanding how things really work. It's pretty much the root that feeds the other 3. These are the forces that keep us stuck. So if we're all stuck in this flood, the million-dollar question is pretty obvious. How in the world do we get to the other side? And this is where the story gets really, really interesting. Because the answer we're given is a paradox. It goes against every single survival instinct we have. So picture this. The story goes that a celestial being, a devata, is looking down and sees the Buddha, just standing there on the far shore, completely safe and dry. The being is just amazed. So he flies down and asks the most direct, simple question you can imagine. How did you do that? How did you cross a flood that swallows up everybody else? And here it is. The brilliant, totally cryptic answer. By not halting and by not straining, I crossed the flood. I mean, just think about that for a second. If you're caught in a raging river, what are your 2 options? You either stop, grab onto something for dear life, or you struggle, you kick, you swim as hard as you possibly can. And the Buddha says he didn't either. So what on earth does that even mean? And then he explains the paradox a little more. He says, look, when I tried to halt, to just stand still, I sank. But when I strained, when I struggled against it, I just got swept away even faster. He's pointing out 2 extremes, 2 failed strategies that, if we're being honest, a lot of us try every single day. One way leads to sinking into despair, and the other leads to just being carried off by chaos. So this brings us right to the solution. If stopping doesn't work and struggling doesn't work, there has to be a third option. There's got to be a balanced, skillful path that isn't about giving up, but it's also not about brute force. And this, right here, is what's known as the middle way. Let's break down these 2 ways to drown. On the left side, you've got sinking. This is what happens when we halt. We're clinging to cravings, holding on to rigid ideas, and we just get complacent. It literally pulls us under. Then on the right, you've got being swept away. That's the straining. It's all restless, frantic energy, that constant struggle that just leads to total burnout. See? Both are just different ways to drown in the same flood. Now, it is so important to get this straight. Not straining does not mean doing nothing. This is not about just floating on your back and hoping you end up somewhere nice. Not at all. It's about a third option, a kind of dynamic, responsive, and really skillful action with the currents of life. It's an active process. So, what does that action look like? What kind of tools do you need? Well, the texts lay out the gear you need for this journey. They're called the 5 spiritual faculties. First, you need faith. Not blind faith, but a real confidence that crossing is actually possible. Second, you need balanced energy. See, not straining, but a steady, persistent effort. Third, mindfulness. This is your GPS, the ability to know exactly where you are in the current without getting lost in it. Fourth, concentration, which is the ability to keep your mind steady, pointed toward that far shore. And finally, wisdom, the clear-sightedness to understand the nature of the flood itself. This is your toolkit for navigating that middle way. Okay, so let's say you use these tools. You navigate the currents, you make it across. What does it actually feel like to finally reach the other side? What is that state of mind on the far shore? Well, the texts describe it as this profound, unshakable freedom. The term for someone who's made it across is an arahant. And maybe the most beautiful description of this state is that the person is fully quenched. Just think about that. Think of the fires of greed and anger and confusion that drive so much of what we do. For the arahant, those fires are out. There's no more fuel to burn. It's a state of deep, deep inner peace, not because the world changed, but because their whole relationship to it has. And there's this incredible poetic verse that tries to capture what this is like. It says, "The path of a person like this is mysterious, even to gods. Their intoxicants, all those mental poisons, are just gone. They've reached a state of freedom so complete, it's almost beyond our normal way of thinking. They are truly free from the flood." And that leaves us with a really powerful question to sit with. In our own lives, right? In our own floods of work and relationships and all the information bombarding us, where are we halting and starting to sink? And where are we straining and just getting swept away? This ancient wisdom is pointing to another path entirely, a path of mindful, balanced movement. So the question is, what would happen if you stopped fighting the current and instead just learned how to skillfully navigate it?